So there's peace talks happening. Peace talks happening, and people like Rachel Maddow and Bernie Sanders are just spazzing out, stuff like this. I mean, there are moments where I got to look at people and wonder, are you okay? Are you okay? And do you need help? Rachel, let us know if you need help.
Russia, Vladimir Putin, Russia hates Russia.
So here we go.
Repeatedly and eerily and in a very out of character way tells the American people he is not allowed to discuss that relationship or his communications with that leader. The political reality of this administration is going to be shaped by whether or not the people who oppose him strongly enough and effectively enough. The political reality of this administration and this presidency will be determined by whether the people who voted for him are horrified enough by what they have wrought that they regret it and are willing to act differently and to speak out about their regret. The reality of this presidency and this administration will be determined in some part by whether or not Republican officials realize that their own survival as politicians depends not on sucking up to Trump, but by helping their constituents survive him.
Mm-hmm. And in turn, even Bernie had a few words to say. This guy's against the peace deal.
Thanks, everybody, for joining me to discuss a very, very serious issue. Yesterday, we witnessed an extremely sad moment in American history. We saw the President of the United States aligning himself with the dictator of Russia, Vladimir Putin, to undermine the independence of Ukraine and its democracy. Let's be clear. Trump is showing us that he sees one of the world's most brutal dictators as his friend and our longtime democratic allies in Europe as his enemies. He wants a world that is safe for authoritarians and oligarchs, but extremely dangerous for democracies. It will not surprise you when I tell you that Trump is lying, as he so often does. Yesterday, Trump said that Ukraine started the war. That's not true. Russia invaded Ukraine twice, first in 2014, and then again in 2022. Right now, Russia occupies about 20% of Ukraine. Since Putin's horrific invasion, over 1 million people have been killed or injured. Every single day, Russia continues to rain down hundreds of missiles and drones on Ukrainian cities. Putin's forces have massacred civilians and kidnapped thousands of Ukrainian children, bringing them back to Russian re-education camps. These atrocities led the International Criminal Court to issue an arrest warrant for Putin in 2023 as a war criminal. Further, Trump called Ukrainian President Zelensky a dictator. That's not true either. Zelensky won 75% of the vote in free elections. In fact, his approval rating is higher than Trump's. In the midst of a brutal war, Ukraine's parliament continues to function and free and unfettered political debate takes place. Trump claimed that our European allies have done little to support Ukraine in its fight against Putin's invasion. He said the United States has contributed 3 times more than Europe. But that's another lie. In fact, Europe has provided more aid to Ukraine than the United States. But it's not just that Trump is lying again. That's not new. It's what this all reveals about where he wants to take our country.
Now, I put you guys through that because, unfortunately, Bernie Sanders isn't that peacemaker. He's not. And look, the war in Ukraine is an absolute disaster. The war in Ukraine costs so much in money and in lives. And yet now, when there's finally talks of ending the bloodshed, ending the war, when there's talk of finally, or maybe some kind of peace, and we all know that once a war ends, all it does is lay down the foundations for the next war, but at least for a moment, for as long as it can, peace, some kind of de-escalation for the moment, because the lives that have been impacted by it have forever been scarred and the resentment still remains. But what is disappointing is that when you have people like Bernie Sanders or anybody else talking about this war in Ukraine, and yet they're piping up the Trump derangement syndrome, where were your principles? At least holding Biden accountable to try and get some kind of ceasefire to happen. I mean, thank goodness the war didn't escalate to where it would be World War III. Thank goodness the tensions didn't rise as high as it did. It should not have happened in the first place. And I don't know why all sides allowed it to happen. Was it for money? Was it for pride? Was it for ego? It doesn't matter in the end. Explain it to the dead. But I want to pull this up here.
The Ukraine war to continue is a monster. Everyone from Rachel Maddow to Bernie Sanders is freaking out about the Trump administration's moves toward ending the war in Ukraine. David Hogg, now the vice chair of the DNC, said on Twitter that if we abandon Ukraine, Poland is next. You know what's going to be a lot more expensive than finishing the war and forcing Putin out of Ukraine? A third world war and a second Marshall Plan. These histrionics are as ridiculous as they are depraved. Obviously, the war in Ukraine needs to end. Polls say Ukrainians themselves want the war to end. If you want Ukrainians to keep dying in this war against the will of the Ukrainians themselves, while you sit safe at home eating snacks and posting on the internet, you're a monster. But saying this really doesn't go far enough. We should all be raging at everyone who pushed things to this point, especially at the leaders of the Western Empire we live under. These psychopaths knowingly provoked an unwinnable war of unfathomable horror by first backing a regime change operation in 2014, and then amassing a proxy military threat on Russia's border in ways the US would never permit on its own border, then refusing off-ramp after off-ramp both before and after Russia invaded. Everyone who paved the way to this nightmare belongs in a cage. And that includes Trump. The sitting president is on social media right now trying to pin this whole thing on Zelensky, when Trump himself helped pave the way to this horror by becoming the first president to start openly pouring weapons into Ukraine while ramping up Cold War tensions and shredding treaties with Russia. Trump, Obama, Biden, Boris Johnson, and all of NATO helped throw Ukraine into the meat grinder, while countless Western experts and analysts warned urgently that their actions would result in Ukraine's destruction. They should all suffer immense consequences. But, of course, we know they won't. None of the government officials, empire managers, career politicians, pundits, and think tank swamp monsters who helped steer Ukraine into the inferno will suffer any consequences of any kind for their atrocities. Nobody will even lose their career. And what's worse is knowing that most of them will re-emerge like zombies from the grave to help manufacture support for the next imperial bloodbath. Most of the same people who drummed up support for the war in Ukraine were responsible for helping to destroy Iraq, when they should have been languishing in a prison cell at The Hague this entire time. We are ruled by the worst among us. Our world will never know peace as long as these freaks are at the steering wheel.
And what's sad is that it's also a bipartisan thing altogether because, hey, hold on. I want to remember, or want all of you to remember, somebody who goes by the name. That's not her name. That's not her name. Nikki Haley. Give it up. That's not her name. Nikki Haley. So, former Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley admonished her 2024 election rival, President Trump, over his stance on Ukraine and recent comments directed at the country's president, Vladimir Zelensky. Trump appeared to blame Zelensky and the country's leadership Tuesday, oh my goodness, for the war in Eastern Europe as it nears its 3-year anniversary. My God, can't it just end? Please let it end. He doubled down on criticism of Ukraine's leader Wednesday, claiming he has done a terrible job of leading a war-torn country and accusing him of taking advantage of Washington with all the aid the U.S. has forked over in the last 3 years. Haley, who was eventually endorsed Trump in 2024 after dropping out of the race, characterized the president's remarks as classic Russian talking points and exactly what Putin wants. So there you go. And you have Haley saying that. Haley, a foreign policy hawk who, after the election, joined the Hudson Institute think tank, has previously said support for Ukraine is in the U.S. national interest and backed Kiev eventually joining the NATO military alliance. Trump has gotten pushback regarding his recent rhetoric on Ukraine from even his former president and election rival, Mike Pence. Mr. President, Ukraine did not start this war. Russia launched an unprovoked and brutal invasion, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives. The road to peace must be built on the truce, Pence wrote. But geez, I don't really trust these politicians to be telling the truth, especially when you have people like this who can't even tell the truth to their own followers.
And in fact, the entire world. Trump is cozying up to Vladimir Putin. So who is Putin? And what kind of world does he want to build? Putin is a dictator who crushed Russia's movement toward democracy after the end of the Cold War. Russia holds sham elections every 6 years where Putin wins 90% of the vote, and authorities don't even try to hide their ballot stuffing. There is no freedom of speech or free media in Putin's Russia. Protests are violently suppressed. Tens of thousands of people are in prison for protesting Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Political dissidents are harassed or thrown into jail.
So when whistleblowers like Edward Snowden or Julian Assange or anybody else, what happens to them, Bernie? What about all the protesters and activists who are protesting, or at least calling out for the Democrats to change their stance in the war on Gaza? Where was their support, especially when they were dismissed not only by you but by Biden and then by Kamala and then by any other Democrat? You see, it's easy for Bernie Sanders to sit on his throne, a throne that he doesn't deserve, because he, quote unquote, created a progressive movement in 2016 and in turn tried to maintain it in 2020. But let's be clear, this war was pointless. So many people died for no reason whatsoever. And if there's going to be peace, God damn it, let it happen now. And no, it shouldn't be Trump ushering it in. But fine, if Trump's going to do it, he made it his campaign promise, then I say let him follow through and said, let the war end. Let it end. It's gone on long enough. Enough of the fear, enough of the uncertainty. And don't worry, folks, there's going to be another war on the horizon. I wish that wasn't true, but it's down the road. Nothing but pure annihilation for the human race. It seems to me that we keep on doing this to ourselves, and it's because we put in people in charge that have no business to be in charge. Decades of going through this. Democrats and Republicans leading us down to slaughter. Let it end. Let there be some kind of peace talk, and don't worry, things will ignite again. There'll be some tension at the border. And they'll say, is the war restarting again? And the media will be doing its clicks and views, and everybody will be pontificating. But maybe I'm tired of it. Maybe you're tired of it. Maybe we're all tired about wondering if the nukes are going to launch and it'll be mushroom clouds in the sky and we're burnt alive. You know who could stop it? It's us. People. Maybe when the people step up, the real leaders will follow. Maybe through our actions of actually speaking to one another and treating each other as brothers. Wouldn't that be a sight? It's disappointing to see people like Bernie Sanders dismissing peace talks. I hope Trump is successful. I hope that there's some kind of negotiation done. But hope in one hand, crap in the other. You know, I've been following Bernie Sanders' career, his politics, his policies, and be clear here too. I'm pretty sure a lot of us in independent media were inspired to do what we are doing now because of the actions of Bernie Sanders. But at the end of the day, it's up to us, the people, to lead. I'm just tired of the war. And maybe it could be achieved